YouTube, what is up, Coach Wiz? We got another video today. We're reacting to Johnny Arnett's "The Truth About John Stockton." I did another John Stockton video. How good is John Stockton? Check that out. It's in my playlist, my Legends highlight playlist. Y'all can go tap into that one. That one did pretty decent. So here we are doing a different version. Let's get right into it, man. Y'all know I'm a John Stockton hater, so y'all not gonna like me this video.
So fairly recently in the NBA, Chris Paul surpassed Jason Kidd on the NBA's all-time assists list, moving into the second spot all-time. This is an impressive feat, and it's worth appreciating the greatness of Chris Paul
Facts.
and reflecting on just how long he's been making a significant impact on the league. Naturally, after Paul reached this milestone, many younger basketball fans began wondering if he had a shot at reaching the number one spot. And that's when they realized that it would never happen, as John Stockton has a career total of 15,806 assists. For some perspective, Nikola Jokic has a lower number of points than the number of assists that John Stockton has. As we speak, the gap between Chris Paul and John Stockton is absolutely massive. And in order for Paul to surpass Stockton, he would basically have to maintain his current level of play until he's nearly 50 years old. Just pure insanity. So with this information being out there in the world, what do you think happened? Do you think younger fans took a moment to appreciate the greatness of John Stockton and respect the fact that he has one of the most unbreakable records in NBA history? Of course not. In typical form for the disrespectful modern fans, they immediately began taking a dump on him as a player, trashing his legacy, ridiculing his competition, and claiming that Chris Paul is the actual all-time assist leader. Because, quote, Stockton's stats are fake. Just to be clear, this is nothing new for John Stockton, as he's been taking heat from various YouTubers, fans, and modern analysts for nearly a decade at this point. When I first entered the YouTube sphere as a creator, the narrative at the time was that he didn't have a left hand. Although it's true that Stockton used predominantly his right hand, it doesn't take much in-depth searching on YouTube for an honest person to realize that Stockton did in fact have a left hand. The next predominant narrative was that John Stockton was the beneficiary of biased statisticians, as many YouTubers and analysts have claimed that Stockton's assist numbers were artificially inflated by Utah statisticians, which is why his numbers ended up being so outlandish. And then, the next predominant narrative was that he wasn't all that special of a point guard because he played with Karl Malone, who was one of the major...
I did hear that, though. I did hear about, the inflation of certain players' stats when at home. That is something that has actually been documented, and that there is some proof to those things. Does it take away? I don't think so, but that's just me.
Reasons why those assist numbers got so high. Those three negative narratives, the left hand, the fake stats, and the Karl Malone handicap, are the main things I'm dissecting in this video. So
the no left hand thing is crazy. Like we gotta stop that, man. These players are in the NBA. He clearly had he was better with his right. Obviously, if you can't stop me from going right, I'm gonna go right. But that doesn't mean that he didn't have a left hand. And then Karl Malone, there's been thousands of players who've played with other great players and have benefited. That shouldn't take away from his greatness. And I'm not the biggest John Stockton fan.
Sit back and enjoy as we uncover the truth behind the legacy of John Stockton. First off, the left hand. To my understanding, this entire narrative started when a YouTuber by the name of the NBA Storyteller made this video. And in short, his conclusion was basically that John Stockton didn't have a left hand. Allegedly, he couldn't dribble with it, pass with it, drive with it, or even finish with it. At the very least, I respect observant individuals who are able to spot certain trends that others may miss, but also a person who's bold enough to make their claim even if they know they're going to take heat for it in return. That's what the NBA Storyteller did with this video, so I gotta give him credit for that. because the footage tells us that Stockton leaned heavily upon his dominant right hand. The thing is, I think this is a product of the era he played in. Back when Stockton was a young player, defensive players can hand check the ball handler, as they essentially steered the offensive player in the direction that they wanted him to go.
True.
Also consider how difficult it is to do stuff like crossover dribbles and various moves with both hands when the defensive player is allowed to be up in your jersey with his hand on you.
Good point.
Naturally, this forces the offensive ball handler to be more protective with the basketball, meaning he would often be backing down a player from the three-point line, and the ball is in his dominant hand as a way to be more secure with the rock. This wasn't just something that Stockton did, but it was a regular part of Magic Johnson's game as well. Then there's extensive footage online of Stockton actually doing work with his left hand. So at the very least, he could use it, but he just didn't use it as often. And here's my last and most significant point about Stockton's left hand, which is essentially, so what if he doesn't have a left hand? So you're trying to tell me that he dominated the game of basketball and became the all-time leader in assists with only one hand? And somehow that makes him less impressive? If anything, that just makes me more mesmerized by the skill of his right hand. Listen, currently the NBA's reigning finals MVP is a guy who definitely doesn't have a left hand in his game. At one point, Jaylen Brown was the highest paid player in NBA history, all while NBA fans and NBA scouts knew full well that he was incapable of driving left, dribbling left, and finishing left.
Wait a minute, man. So, are you saying Jaylen Brown has no left hand, but saying that Stockton does? Because it's the same thing to me. Now, he clearly can use his left hand. I've seen him finish with his left hand. I've seen him dunk with his left hand, dribble with his left hand. I don't know, man. I don't get it. These guys are pros. These guys are pros. And I've played against pros, trained pros, been in that gym with pros, played with pros, like done this at a very high level. So to me, for anybody to say these players don't have something, it's kind of crazy. Something as simple as a left hand that you work on in elementary school. Like, if you can't stop me from going left, going right, whatever, then that's what I'm going to do until you stop it. And yeah, a lot of players might not be as comfortable with their other hand, but that doesn't mean that they completely don't have one. Because if you completely don't have one, you're not going to the league because they'll completely shut that off. And y'all know I'm a Boston fan. I got to take up for my people.
Left with any bit of consistency. For goodness sake, look at how bad he is in this layup drill. Are we positive that John Stockton would have been any worse than this? It's also weird when people act like a player having one single weakness suddenly destroys his entire legacy and credibility. Even the greatest players of all time had weaknesses in their game.
Facts.
For example, Wilt Chamberlain, Shaquille O'Neal, and LeBron James are all liabilities from the free throw line. Guys like Magic Johnson, Steph Curry, and Dirk Nowitzki are subpar defensive players at best. Michael Jordan was a terrible three-point shooter in the first 4 seasons of his career. I could go on, but the point is that if these weaknesses of these great players don't fully invalidate their legacies, then why should that be the case for John Stockton? Let's get into the next one, the alleged fake stats. The narrative is that Stockton got homebrewed stats for his games in Utah because the biased Jazz statisticians wanted to make their guy look better. Tom Habistro covered some of this when he made his famous critical piece about Michael Jordan's 1988 season. Is there some truth to these home-cooked stats? Possibly. And there's been some examples surfacing online that look pretty damning for Stockton. The thing is, basketball is an imperfect sport, recorded by imperfect people. Not only do I expect there to be mistakes, but I fully expect there to be instances where players are artificially elevated by their supporters. When I did my own video covering Michael Jordan's 1988 season, I found a lot of evidence that specifically some of his steals numbers might have been juiced in some instances. And guess what, guys? I've been doing research for my video about LeBron's assists, which will be dropping next month. And I can promise you in advance that there's some fishiness to his numbers as well. I don't care who the star player is. If you look hard enough, you're always going to be able to find instances where the numbers were inaccurate in their.
Very true. I'm glad he said that because that's how it goes. Like that's how it goes. So I'm glad that he said that because it's true. It's true for all superstars, especially at home. You know what I mean? If Kobe Bryant and Derek Fisher are both under the basket and they both swat at the ball and it goes in, they're probably going to give it to Kobe.
Their favor. So that's the first major part of my point. But the next one is maybe even more important. Let's really delve into these quote home cooked stats. First off, what you need to know is that there is a different statistician for home and away games.
Facts.
For example, when the Lakers play in Los Angeles, their stats will be tracked by their own statistician. But when they travel to Utah, their stats will be tracked by the Jazz statistician. And this is why people make the accusations that certain players benefited from home-brewed stats. So let me give you some examples. For LeBron James's career, he averages 7.6 assists per game at home and 7.2 assists per game on the road. So immediately, some of you might be looking at this and assume that there's some shenanigans going on. But the reality is, general NBA players always play better at home. They have the advantage of the home crowd. They're sleeping in their own bed, they're not jet lagged from all the traveling, and they're present with their families in their routines.
I agree with that a little bit. I think if you're a superstar, you just good, period. That's an even bigger statement for role players, but I could feel you. I could feel it a little bit.
For a variety of reasons, it only makes sense that the numbers consistently look better at home. So let's look at some other great facilitators. In Magic Johnson's career, he averaged 12.2 assists at home and 11.6 on the road. Chris Paul has averaged 9.6 assists at home and 9 assists on the road. And then John Stockton averaged 10.9 assists at home and 10.1 on the road. So immediately, the one thing that stands out is that Stockton has the largest discrepancy between home stats and road stats.
Yeah.
So maybe there actually is something behind these allegations. But keep in mind that the difference between his gap and Chris Paul's gap is 0.2 assists per game. Not really something that's shaking up the all-time rankings by any significant extent.
True.
So let's just assume that we can only go by Stockton's numbers in his away games. If you adjusted his home game averages to be the same as his road numbers, Stockton still would have finished with around 15,190 assists, meaning that even without the home game boost, he would still have a lead over Chris Paul greater than 3,000 assists. It would still be virtually impossible for CP3 to be even close to catching Stockton before he retires. So at the end of the day, this narrative that Stockton is only the leader because of the home-cooked stats is not only stupid, but it's completely asinine to even suggest it. Lastly is the criticism that he's only the NBA's all-time leader because he played alongside of Karl Malone. Well, let me start things off by saying that I don't think anyone is ruling out the fact that Malone obviously boosted Stockton's assist numbers. I mean, for goodness sake, the mailman was one of the greatest power forwards in NBA history. He was a two-time league MVP, and he's the game's third leading scorer on the all-time list. But to be fair, who is Kobe without Shaq? Who is LeBron without Wade? Who is Magic without Kareem? And who is Michael Jordan without Scottie Pippen? Every all-time great benefited from some significant help. So to pick and choose which ones to disqualify is completely unfair unless you do it to the rest of the field as well. In his career, John Stockton and Karl Malone played a total of 19 seasons together. And in that time, there was a total of 10 regular season games where Stockton played without Malone. This was back in the day where NBA superstars played all 82 games with extreme consistency. Regardless of the fact that most of these 10 regular season games were past Stockton's prime, he still managed to average 9.6 assists per game without Karl Malone. This means that if we prorated Stockton's assists without Malone to the rest of his career, he would still have about 14,438 assists, meaning that he would have a lead of 2,300 assists over Chris Paul, even without his greatest offensive weapon. So basically, the dumb narratives that are constantly regurgitated about Stockton are just that, extremely dumb false narratives. If you ask me who Stockton was, he was simply one of the top 2 greatest passers in the history of the game. He wasn't an explosive scorer by any means, but he was very efficient in his contributions and was always a threat from 3-point range. He was an all-time great defensive player, and I'm just now mentioning that he's the game's all-time leader in steals as well, and by a country mile. He wasn't a flashy player by any means. He was smooth and methodical. He was extremely smart and safe with the basketball, as he had an incredible assist-to-turnover ratio. He was a master of angles, anticipation, and communication.
Yeah, Stockton is like proof that you don't got to be the biggest, fastest, strongest. As long as you know how to play angles, you work super hard, you're smart, you fight, like you'll be fine. Because he did all this, and like a lot of this is just effort and IQ with him. I mean, he could shoot, but Stockton wasn't flashy. You know, when you watch him, you knew like, oh no, he a ball player. But there was nothing flashy about his game, nothing that stood out when you watched him for the regular common person, right? But he still dominated at his position for sure.
He was nowhere close to being considered as an athletic freak. But like other greats in the modern NBA, like Nikola Jokic, Luka Doncic, and Chris Paul, John Stockton didn't need to be, as he was fundamentally sound, skilled, and just understood the game better than 99% of the guys within the league. Sure, he made it to the NBA Finals twice and never won a single championship. But that's nobody's fault other than Michael Jordan. Literally, nobody's fault other than Michael Jeffrey Jordan, who kept a lot of all-time greats from winning championships. Stockton led his Jazz to beat a Rockets three-headed monster of Olajuwon, Barkley, and Drexler. And before you say it was because they were old, newsflash, the Bulls and Jazz were basically just as old.
Facts.
Stockton also helped lead his Jazz to defeat the Lakers super team in 1998, who had 4 NBA All-Stars like Shaq, Kobe, Eddie Jones, and Nick Van Exel. This was a Lakers team that many people expected to represent the West in the 1998 NBA Finals. And even the Lakers themselves made some of those claims throughout that season. And Stockton was the floor general for the team that beat that squad. You can say that Stockton didn't have a left hand, that he had weak competition, and he had a superstar forward that made him look better than he actually was. You're free to have whatever opinion you want. But you know who I'm listening to the opinion of? The guy who's arguably the greatest defensive point guard in the history of the game, Gary Payton. This is a guy who competed with Magic Johnson, guarded Michael Jordan in the NBA Finals, guarded Kobe Bryant in the NBA playoffs. And he's also a guy whose career overlapped with Dwayne Wade and LeBron James. So he's a defensive legend who's been a part of all kinds of amazing eras. And you know who he says is the most difficult player he's ever had to guard? That's right, John freaking Stockton.
Yeah, but we all have our, you know what I'm saying? Sometimes a guy just has your number too. Sometimes it just be like that. You know what I mean? When I was in college, there was this kid that gave me he gave me problems. He wasn't really all that, but he used to kill me for some reason. Y'all know how I feel about John Stockton, man.
So based on all that, if he indeed doesn't have a left hand after all, well then I guess his right hand might just be the greatest right hand in the history of basketball.
That's enough, man. What y'all think, man? Shout out to John Stockton. I do believe John Stockton is underrated. I do believe he's one of the best point guards ever. I would take Chris Paul over John Stockton. Hey, that's just me. That's just me. That's just me. But hey, man, let me know what y'all think. Let me know where y'all got John Stockton ranked amongst point guards. Put that in the comments below. I appreciate y'all watching, man. If y'all don't got your membership, get it soon. Live streams are going to be starting next week. And I don't want to be, you know what I'm saying? I don't want y'all upset with me when you ain't in the live chat or when I'm not responding to you in the live chat. I'm just saying, man. I'm trying to blow this thing up. But shout out to y'all, man. I appreciate y'all. I'm gone.